Good day. My name is Ongama Mdimka. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a part-time lecturer of politics and political economic issues. I have a very important message for South Africans. It is a very simple message. Your country needs you. In order for you to understand the gravity of this statement, I'd like to highlight the major tasks of the generations that came before us, starting from about 400 years ago. In the 1600s through to the late 1880s, from around the 1600s through to the late 1800s, we have a generation which I would call the warriors. The warriors confront colonialism. And if we look at it from the point of view of the settler community, the European settler community, what we find is that the task of that generation was to conquer Africans, whereas the task of Africans was to defend themselves against colonialism. And that meant defending their system of economic production, which is subsistence farming. It meant protecting their culture, and it meant political independence from being subjects of British colonial rule. The generation that follows the warriors is a generation whom I call the Black Intelligentsia. What's important about the Black Intelligentsia is that these are people who largely, mission-educated men who begin to shape thinking about being in a post-war South Africa. These are men whose mission in life becomes leading the Black nation towards politics of inclusiveness in an emerging South African colonial economy. So these men, they espouse the values of democracy. These are men who were mission educated, because when missionaries came, they emphasized the need to empower Africans to be able to lead successful lives, given the fact that land was increasingly being taken away from them. So with, for example, the start of schools like Hilltown, the start of Lovedale, the schools where most of the African leaders went to, like your Thabo Mbeki, and some up north, are the schools that get started within this movement of empowering Africans with the skills for industry, enterprise, as well as employment. Following the intelligentsia is a group called the Liberators. The Liberators are born in the early 1900s, all the way through to about 1950s, mid-1950s. Their task in history is to lead the liberation movement towards democracy. In fact, some of them, they lead the struggle into exile, into prison, until 1994 in South Africa, when we get democracy. And in fact, they are in the forefront of bridging between the generations, being a generation that assumed leadership and transferred it to a generation whom I call the Agitators. The Agitators are born in the late 1950s and early 1960s. In 1976, this is a group of young people that begin to re-energize the struggle and agitate for greater change. It is them who are effective in the 1970s, very effective in the 1980s, in fact, being involved in a number of structures, among them the United Democratic Front. So this is a very important generation. In fact, one generation whom the current generation is usually compared with, the generation of 1976. Now, it has been the case that other than, especially the latter part of this generation born in the mid-1970s to the 1990s, that The 1990s generation has been understood as the born frees. So what this generation has been known about is more what happened to them rather than their contribution in history. When we talk about all who are living in South Africa today, one problem that confronts us is the variations of the same problem, which is poverty, inequality, and joblessness or unemployment. Now, this is a challenge that confronts us, and it's not unique to South Africa. It affects almost everybody around the world as global economies begin to decline and lose jobs and face one crisis after another. We have a choice as people living in this generation. Our choice is to be either recognized in history as the passive victims, the generation of the passive victims, or we may choose to be a generation of innovators, or a generation called the restorers. We have an opportunity as a country to restore what used to be, to restore greater levels of prosperity for Africans who are afflicted by poverty. We have a greater responsibility to restore entrepreneurship and enterprise in our time so that we can resolve the problems of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. The question is, why and how? First, let me clarify the statement that I made, that your country needs you. It is your country, as much as it is that of politicians who usually claim our people suffer this, that, or the other, and they refer to their people. And the point I'm making today is that it is not their people alone. This is our country. It is your country, and it needs you. There's a need. The need is to fight against poverty and unemployment. There's also a person who's central to resolving that need or that problem, and that person is you and I. How so? I think it's about time as South Africans that we begin to yes, we've mourned our problems, we've mourned the fact that we are born in a dysfunctional family, or you are born in a situation where, your parents are HIV positive, whatever the case may be, or you are born in a community that is the forgotten Silver Town, perhaps, which the 2011 Statistics South Africa survey confirmed is the worst place to live. You may be born there. But here's something I'd like to say. It is about time that we begin to heal from all the problems and challenges that have grieved and hurt us. Once we do that, we then need to have a new perspective on our problems. I believe I had the potential to have played for one of the major football clubs in the world, and my favorite one is Barcelona. The problem is I couldn't realize that dream because I grew up in a rural area where there were no facilities whatsoever. And yes, we played well, notwithstanding the facilities, but this is a place where scouts would never come to look for great talent. So I didn't become a player for my favorite club, Barcelona. Now, I've got two choices. I mourn about that continuously in my life, or after having mourned and healed from that, I begin to gain a fresh perspective on how I can resolve this problem in a way that will not only make my life better, but other people's lives better as well. So, a typical example would be, I go back to my community, I identify kids that play soccer very well. I invest in them, buy a ball for about 200 rand, sponsor, their kit, or whatever the case may be, and I spot the talent. Now, I have resolved one part of the problem. I would also go to soccer clubs like Orlando Pirates, Kaizer Chiefs, and find out what their appetite is about sponsoring a scholarship for somebody who could study, but also knowing very well they're going to play for Kaizer Chiefs one day. Now, in that way, I would have brokered a deal in the sense that I then link a potential player to a club and structure very strong agreements that once this player plays and gets paid, then returns on investment come to me. And what that does is it doesn't only help me as an entrepreneur, but it also helps young kids in rural areas who would never land an opportunity to play football, never mind at a young age, and get bursaries to go to the best schools in the country. So your country needs you as a South African. But in order for you to feel that you have something to contribute to society, you first need to be healed of whatever pain, whatever bitterness that you may have inside of you. And once that is done, you need to gain a new perspective on the problems. My pastor, Apostle Jerome Liberty, usually says, from each one of your problems, you are supposed to be richer. Or in other words, you are not supposed to come out of your problems broke than you were before you came into them. So here it is. We've got something to contribute. Otherwise, if we don't, we will be a generation that is relatively ahistorical or doesn't have any contribution of historical significance in this country. Rich for the top, the bottom is overcrowded.